Evita, welcome to Constituting America's Constitutional Chats. We're going to ask you to make a few opening remarks about today's topic, and then we'll go to questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here because Constituting America was really I feel like in a like life-changing moment for me. It was the first time that I felt like I was really doing something involved, like government related, politically related, outside of my own parents. So that was, and also to win an award like that at such a young age was I think a real confidence booster. So really appreciative of Constituting America. My brother also won one of the film contests, and he's actually in film today. So grateful for the work that you guys do. I guess I think related to the topic today, I've had a lot of free speech related run-ins in my college years that I'd love to share with you guys. When I went to the University of Chicago, which is actually known for being a premier free speech institution, especially among some of the Ivy League schools in America, I expected there to be a lot of freedom and diversity of thought. And when I went to U Chicago initially, I realized that that actually is not true. And I was in the not only the political minority, but also it was very difficult to express myself without being labeled a bigot, being labeled different, terrible words that really should not, or slandered in certain ways that should not be associated with just regular political discourse. And what happened to me specifically is I was a little bit apolitical when I first went to school. I didn't want to, make any, I didn't want to cause any problems. I didn't want to make any enemies. So I was, just trying to live out my college years in without controversy. And then when I was a sophomore in college, the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics had a program where they asked students who were part of college Republicans and college Democrats, and I was a member of college Republicans, to participate in a Why I Vote program, or a Get Out the Vote initiative. And it was called I Vote Because. And students would stand in front of the Institute of Politics, which at the time was run by David Axelrod, a former Obama chief advisor. And we held up whiteboards that said, I vote because, and then you would say why you vote. And some people said, I vote because I want universal health care. I vote because, abortion is health care. I vote because kids shouldn't be put in cages. At the time, there was a lot of controversy around Donald Trump and whether, he was treating illegal migrants well. And I wrote, I vote because the coronavirus won't destroy America, but socialism will. That was my political statement for why I voted. And at this time, we hadn't gone into lockdown yet, but we were right about to go into COVID lockdown. And I got intense backlash from all of my peers. It went campus viral, and then it went city of Chicago viral. And people said I didn't deserve to be at the university. People said I looked ugly. People went after my family. They said I didn't deserve to even vote, and that they would personally stop me from voting because of what I wrote on this whiteboard. And then I got a death threat from a kid who was actually lived down the hall from me. And it was online. Obviously, he didn't say it to me in person. And I decided that that was enough. I had not responded to any of the hatred I had gotten at that point. It was probably three or 4 days of just like overwhelming, social media backlash. And then I decided to write an op-ed in my local, my student paper. It's called the Chicago Maroon. And that also went kind of viral, and it got picked up by the Federalist, and it got picked up by Fox, which was very cool. And it was the first op-ed I'd ever written. And it was an interesting experience for me because U Chicago says that they're a free speech institution. They say that they foster intellectual diversity. But what I realized is that there is no culture of free speech at U Chicago, that somebody disagreed with them and they didn't, disagree with me in a polite and normal way, they went to really extreme personal attacks. They even sent me a death threat. So these are not ways that you interact with people in normal conversation. This is not how you have a political debate. This is not a culture of free speech. And so after that, I decided to start my own publication, The Chicago Thinker, with a lot of other kids who were like-minded, who came out of the shadows and said, hey, I agree with you, but I can't post about it publicly because, again, there's not a culture of free speech. People were kind of afraid to say really what they think on campus. And so the Chicago Thinker was really wildly successful. We had we fought a lot of COVID tyranny. We are a conservative publication, but we also were just really aimed at creating an environment that was more open to dialogue, because there really were no conservative voices on campus at that time. So and we also did some really great reporting on the U Chicago Disinformation Conference, which is really interesting when it comes to free speech. And I could talk about that more later, but it was hosted by the Atlantic, the publication, as well as the University of Chicago, where you had journalists and politicians and academics and even Barack Obama come to campus and say, here's why we need to censor speech on the internet, because disinformation is so dangerous. And U Chicago was really premier, or the Chicago Thinker was really premier in exposing them for really, I think, violating their own closely held values or stated held values of being a free speech institution. There are other things that U Chicago did as well during some of the BLM protests. The school came out with very politicized statements. Again, we have something at U Chicago called the Calvin Report that says administrators shouldn't be indicating what students should and shouldn't think on campus, and they were doing that. So it was really interesting to see a school that was very committed to free speech, statedly gets a lot of donations for that, and really in practice not live up to them.
Well, first of all, we're really sorry that you've had to go through all that, and you are so brave to stand up and give voice to so many students who were there, and as you said, were like-minded, but felt they couldn't. And I know we've got a lot of questions, and I'm sure that we're going to have a great discussion today. So I'm going to turn this over to Janine.
Hi, Evita. Well, while you were speaking, can y'all see me and hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Look what I went and got. Okay. Oh, let's see.
Okay.
Oh, can I get it to focus? Is it going to focus? Oh, I can't get it to focus. This is Evita's artwork. Wait, maybe I need to turn blur off. Let's turn blur off. And now we're at risk of you seeing my, okay, there. That's Evita's winning artwork. Isn't that good? We should have shown the video too. And you were how old? You were like 9 or 10,
Yeah.
But and you talked about you'd done different renditions, and you had the 3 tiers of really, freedom, which is still what you're doing. I always find that's really fascinating with youth, with children, how we all and our children exhibit things in their youth that they end up following in their adult years a lot of the time. But how brave you are. And let me ask you a couple of questions. What was the paper that you created? The Chicago what?
The Chicago Thinker.
Okay, now is that through the campus, or was that just that?
So we went through the Intercollegiate Studies Network. So they funded our publication so we could actually pay for our website, which is really great. They fund a lot of really excellent publications across the United States. But our publication was purposely independent from the university, because we actually tried to start a Turning Point USA chapter before the publication, and we were denied. They wouldn't give us funds for it. They said that it was dangerous. So that's the environment we were dealing with. So we just said we have to be fully independent. We don't want to be beholden to the university. So the publication still exists. I've graduated thus far, but they're still around. They're doing great work, and they're made up of U Chicago students, but independent of the university.
Well, that's fabulous. Not perfect, but fabulous. And as far as that they would fund you and all that. But it's good that you want to remain independent as well. But that it's going to be a tradition that continues on at the school, and that you started it. So power. That's a great legacy right there. And as I was listening to you too, something struck. You talked about they said they were a university of free speech, but the culture wasn't free speech. And I think there's an obligation of the administration at these schools to make sure there is a culture of free speech. Just putting it on some, document where they want to make sure that the parents who are paying for their students' schools see that, oh, this is what we believe. But if they don't follow that up with allowing it as a culture in the school. But that was really interesting to me. Is how you talked about the culture. Juliet was up against this
Yes.
well at Rice University in ways that were just ostracizing. And I watched the social media attacks, and where it came to me, those kind of attacks are not only dangerous with, what you're talking about, but it's like a bully, right? It's
Yeah.
just a form of bullying, to not allow someone else to speak. But then when I thought about is what you were able to do with starting your own paper, the founders of our country gave us that in the United States Constitution, with the First Amendment and the bill, the freedom of speech, freedom of the press. And so even though the school was trying to censor it, the Constitution still gave you that ability to start that paper. So I just wondered if you wanted to talk about a little bit about how lucky we are to have our original document, and that because of that, think if we didn't have that, you had that basis. It's sort of like, if the school wasn't give it to you, the foundation of the country would.
Yeah, and I just kind of thought of something. You put up my old picture, which I hadn't seen in a while, and I I don't know if I really knew what I was doing at the time. I think I had a very surface level understanding of. I was 9, right? So my understanding of our Constitution wasn't exactly very deep. But I really a I agree with myself a lot more now than I did before about having God at the top, and then you have the founding fathers, because I think the real problem with U Chicago, with a lot of college campuses these days, is that and maybe this is a hot take, but they're not religious. And our founding fathers, if you look at the quotes from John Adams, he said our system is meant for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate for any other. I believe that the Constitution was, and the liberties that we've been afforded are informed by Christianity. Many of them are. And so to not have that underpinning at an institution, right, is a huge problem. I think it in the same way that America is no longer a religious nation anymore. I think that's part of why you're seeing us turn away from our founding documents, because those values are no longer valued by the populace. And so, and even if you think about what is the purpose of a university? It's to seek the truth. Well, they don't talk about the truth anymore. Everything's morally relative. Everything's my truth and your truth. Specifically, the sociology departments have abandoned any sort of objectivism, any sort of objective truth at all. And it means that the university and education is in itself kind of meaningless these days. And I do believe that it's connected to a lot of the assaults that we're seeing on the Constitution today, is this fall into, I think, moral decay.
Or lack of knowledge as well, and as you talk about your faith, I think about freedom of religion in this country, and that people can get that moral value in any of their religions, you know what I mean, whether they're Jewish, of a Jewish religion, or whatever they may be, that at least it's a fundamental belief in a higher power that gives us these great and then Christianity, of course, is a very strong element in the variety of religions that we have in this country. But just to have a higher power, right? To say that I am whatever my religion may be, I am accountable to someone higher than me. I'm going to have values based off the fact that I am not the center of the universe. And so that's a really great point that you make. There seems to be a loss of something outside ourselves, that it just seems to be this myopic sort of egocentric sort of, you know, spewing, instead of really why I'm accountable. And I would think that along your line of thinking, if you're accountable to a higher power, to your God, and if you're accountable, then you're accountable to seeing every other person as a human being, that God is within them. And then if you see that God is within them, then you want to respect them and you want to be able to have a conversation with them. So how do you feel today about the ability? Is there any growth, do you think? Is there any promise in this country and with your generation? As far as the future of our country, the belief in the founding documents. And when I said knowledge is power, it's just even understanding our like we do it at Constituting America. We don't just talk about the Constitution. We talk about what the founding fathers believed and their principles and things of that nature that led them to such so not really having students understand the basis of our country is a big part of this. But do you feel there's potentially a shift now in your generation, with wanting to say, wait, I am tired of this. This just feels wrong and angry and like a bully. And we as a rising generation want to try to be different, and to be more open-minded. Do you feel that your generation is going to carry that torch?
Yes. And I entered college in 2018, but if you look at even some years before, I think you saw the growth specifically during the Obama years in safe spaces, in this idea of pronouns, in like a real, I think there's always been there's always, I don't want to, I'm trying not to get too political, you guys. I think that there has been a lot of there's been a lack of culture of free speech on campuses, and you saw a major rise in it during the Obama years. And as of late, I think people are getting tired of it. If you look at the way young people have voted recently, if you look at the way that young people are rejecting cancel culture en masse, specifically young men, I think you're going to see an opportunity for maybe a revitalization of a culture of free speech, of a return to valuing our founding documents. And I don't know if it's going to be very intellectual. That's the thing. That's why Constituting America is really important. But I think it's possible that there is an opportunity to message to a lot of young people who are really disillusioned with just the inability for them to speak their mind in the public square, the digital public square, without being shamed by certain political factions.
And in closing, because I have to toss now because my time is up. We're reading Democracy in America right now by Alexis de Tocqueville. We're doing a 90-day, well, it's more than a 90-day, an academic study on it. And it's really fascinating because what I just read and was recording, and wrote a blog about the subject of assembly, that Alexis de Tocqueville felt that speech was really important, but you need to build on that with assembly. And he talked about how when you come together, you actually have to look at each other in the eye. You have to listen to other people's opinions. There's more of a sense of a culture of having to listen to one another. There's this ability to be so rude and so bullying on paper. So I think assembly is really important too. To coming together to actually, because it's harder to do those things in person, when you're actually looking at someone and you can, it's more tangible, the sense that they're a real human being and there is a soul in their eyes that I see. And I'll just close with also that I agree with you completely. There needs to be, this is one of the things we fight for at Constituting America, an ability to reason. And you can't reason if you can't hear both points of view. Right? You're only stifling yourself if you just hear one point of view. So to have an open conversation, to be able to have a dialectic, like the philosopher Hegel talked about, to actually have to listen and then be able to process and then to make your own opinion, then it's not so much built in an echo chamber. So you make us think and you give us hope. And I have to tell you, Evita, I have hope when I listen to you and see that your bravery for standing up against that kind of attack and not just absolutely being swallowed and defeated by that. I watched my own daughter, who I consider one of the strongest people in the world, really fight being defeated. And so the fact that you weren't, I'm very, very impressed and grateful for you for starting that paper at the school and for all that you're continuing to do for the country, for your faith, for the rising generation. So I continue to be impressed with you ever since the day I met you. And I can't wait to see you in person again. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'm going to talk to you. Thank you.
Hello, Evita. Thank you for sharing your story. It is a phenomenal story for us and our listeners to hear. This is Jewel Gilbert, for all of our listeners who may not be watching as well and watching after. I was in college actually at the same time as you, when all of this, when lockdowns happened, and it is an experience that will shape my philosophy of life moving forward because of the reactions that you described, which took many people by surprise. So there's kind of two things I want you to touch on a little bit. Sometimes when I try to explain the way that it felt to be in college at the time and the way that it still feels many places now to people, and I just say, college is very leftist, or however I try to explain it, it seems to be a disconnect that they may not be able to comprehend the type of almost like ideological oppression that somebody like yourself may feel, and the way that you would be stifled in um, your social endeavors and your academic endeavors, and how there's an incentive structure almost built around buying into the leftist ideologies that the professors generally hold anytime that we look at, like statistics of our professors left or right. So could you talk about, maybe try to describe for those going into college and those who are out of college, the try to tell them, instead of just saying like, oh, it's a leftist, try to tell them, what does it really feel like when you have different views, and it's not just that you can't speak on your views, but it's that you are made to be shut out of the conversation in a way.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a very accurate description of what somebody who is not not aligned with the political orthodoxy on campus will go through. So so as a college student, as a freshman, some people knew I went to college Republicans, and there were questions about it, and there were people who I think were wary of me, maybe didn't want to be my friend. I tried to get into a sorority, and they said that because I was in CRs, because I was in college Republicans, that might be a sign I don't hold the values of the sorority. And so I was not allowed in. So I didn't get to be part of a sorority on campus. There were a lot of men actually that I met at UChicago who would say privately, oh, I like what you're doing at the Thinker, or I love the article that you wrote in response to all the hate you've gotten. I can't say anything. And I'd ask them, well, why? And a lot of them said it's because I can't get a date, because there's actually a very large political divide gender-wise among our generation. And so a lot of young men specifically feel a lot of pressure not to share their thoughts because they are fearful that they won't get a date. And I don't blame them. Actually, there's a lot of people who are saying, based off of how their boyfriend or mostly their boyfriend voted in this last election, well, I'm going to, not date you anymore. Or some women saying, I'm going to get divorced from you. So there's a real, I just think, inability for people who disagree to have frank conversations anymore. And I'm somebody who was really disturbed by this when I went to UChicago, because I come from a family with really diverse political perspectives. My dad is a former Republican member of Congress. He's about to join the Trump admin. My grandparents are Bernie bros. They literally have CNN on 24/7. So, and I love them. My closest cousin, who is really like a sister to me, she voted for Kamala Harris. I voted for Donald Trump. We can have a conversation. I love her. She's my family. And I also come from the swing state of Wisconsin, so I think a lot of Wisconsinites feel that way. We're all over the map, right? Everybody kind of has very split perspectives here. It's not a monolith. But going to a setting where it was so oppressive was really, I think, disturbing. And I love that you brought up COVID as well. That was really interesting because that wasn't even, in my opinion, it shouldn't have been political. I had a friend who was deaf, and he relies on lip reading in the classroom. Well, when you put a mask on, you can't lip read. And he would try to explain that to the professors. And at one point he was, people accused him of saying, oh, you want to kill people because of you not wanting to wear a mask in the classroom. And he actually wrote a little letter in the Wall Street Journal about it, and the schools lifted the mask mandate after he did that, which was wonderful. But the accusations that he was getting for saying, hey, I need to be able to hear what's happening in the classroom, were ridiculous and out of control. And I just think the temperatures need to come down, and we need to have genuine, honest conversations. And unfortunately, that is not happening on college campuses. And it's not happening to the point where people are self-censoring, not only in the classroom, but in their personal lives, which is a really negative thing if you think about how it's, I think, conditioning students to treat others and to self-censor as they head off into the real world. Because what happens at a university doesn't stay there. That cultural climate is then brought into the rest of America.
And I think that was a wonderful way to describe real world implications of trying to speak the truth that many of us have gone through in our generation. And for those who are, look at and they think that maybe that it can stay in the colleges, I think our culture has proved that it does not, because then corporate culture follows oftentimes the college culture and onward and upward. And we've seen many of these negative things, which did start on college campuses, filter into almost every aspect of American life. So that story that you just shared, I hope that everybody can hear, and we can start to create incentives for students at every level to be able to speak what they believe is the truth, and then to honestly debate those ideals. So you don't get to just have any idea you want, and then have everybody say that idea, act as if that idea is true without then hearing their perspective, which is the second half of that is without dialogue, debate, then you can't really come to the truth. So the next question I want to try to get to is, you brought up about you had brought up a bunch of points about our culture, and one of the things you brought up was really the foundations of our culture, and there was one of the words you used, objectivism, and under almost in the foundation of everything that was in my college experience, there was this there's this total commitment to moral relativism. But then at the same time as having this commitment to moral relativism, there was this strange, strict moral code that they also seemed to place on all the students, which did not have its foundation in the same principles that founded our country. Was that an experience that you also had? And have you ever thought about that?
Yes, yes, I did. And I think that the biggest detriment is when you look at the classroom and you say, okay, especially if you're in a humanities, or I was a history major, you do all the reading. Sometimes they'll assign you a book to read, an entire book before class, and then you have to go and you have to talk about it. And if you can't have a conversation and talk about it frankly, well, then you're not really getting the benefit of an education, which is a huge problem. I think that the moral signaling is really negative when it comes from the administration specifically. So during BLM, which, by the way, I did riot reporting in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which was really, my husband was with me too. We were dating at the time, and he said it was terrifying. I thought it was kind of fun, but he did not like us going there. The point is that after these, we had these, this sort of giant movement in America, protests across the country. the university, my university, and then various departments at the university decided to make statements saying that George Floyd was murdered, which actually had not been decided in a court of law yet at that time, saying that America is a systemically racist country. And you can believe that, and that's totally fine. I just don't think that's an appropriate statement to be coming from an administration, because it signals to the rest of the campus, or even to your specific department, which my history department did this as well, that, you know, we believe this is truth, this is a fact, when it's actually a subjective statement, it's an opinion. And to signal that to the campus has a chilling effect on what people are allowed and not allowed to say. And I had a situation where I said, you know, BLM is an organization rooted in Marxism. Their founder said explicitly that they were committed to it in a classroom setting. Actually, it was a Zoom classroom setting, and my professor muted me. He stopped me from talking. He was like, that's not true, which it actually is true if you look up the founding of BLM. But again, these are signals from the administration that only certain political opinions or moral opinions are allowed to be had by the students, and that's completely inappropriate.
Well, that's you just dropped another pretty big bomb, just to say you were making this point about BLM and your professor muted you in your Zoom class. These things are yeah, I mean, these are the experiences I had in class too. And it is, again, it's almost like when you start to try to explain it to people, it is hard to get it all out, because it's like, it's so much. And sometimes it can seem to be trivialized to the older generation when you're trying to make a point to them. Because when you look back at history and the social unrest of the 60s and the 70s, and then you look today from the outside looking in, apart from the George Floyd incident and many of those riots, from the outside looking in, it does not look like it did in the 60s, and it does not look as, you don't see as large of protest, and you don't see as much destruction, you don't see the same types of riots, but almost it can be more destructive because it does happen in an institutional way. And it's institutionalized in a way that as we come in, it's so much easier for us just to go along, and then we come out and we take that into the world. So I guess in closing, I have one more minute. Lockdowns were extremely influential part of my life and will be forever, because it's helped me to distill the truth about what I believe freedom is, and where my rights come from, and what God wants from our culture. For you, were you very surprised at the vitriol from those who are advocating the stripping of our unalienable rights due to the pandemic? Was that something that really surprised you, or is it something that made sense to you?
It shocked me. I was beside myself by what happened, because if you think about young people, and I like that you brought up the 60s, we're supposed to be rebels. We're supposed to not want people to be constantly telling us what to do. And you saw at the university level, very pronounced, but even in the rest of America during that time, just the growth of the nanny state, people telling us you have to put a mask on, you have to take this jab. Or I had a friend who went to Union College in New York. She was expelled from a university because she was injured by the vaccine. She was confirmed actually by Pfizer that she was a vaccine injury victim. And they said, you have to take the booster. And she said, I can't, I'm injured. Here's a note from my doctor. They said, you have to take the booster or you're expelled. They expelled her. This is reported. I covered it. Ridiculous. It was a crazy story. And I almost got expelled, and I had to sue my university to stay because I wanted to have a religious exemption, which they never really accepted it. They just didn't want me to talk about it publicly anymore. That's another helpful thing about having a publication and then also reposting all of my articles in the Federalist. You have more of a voice, but a lot of people didn't. And you had to take the jab, you had to wear the mask. We had a snitch list at U Chicago, so where students would report other students for violating COVID rules in the city and then at the university level, which I think is very communist. I felt like it was a real rejection of everything that America stands for. And I felt like the students not only were supportive of it, but there was like a delight in reporting on other students. There was a sort of disturbing joy that they had in enforcing and informing on others that I found to be very disturbing and very un-American.
Yeah, and I do think that when we look at the foundations of the failures of the education system and the understanding that that a student would have from most schools of what freedom and what rights are, I think we do see that the foundation of a human right is so weakened to what the social to just being a social construct is what they probably would say that it is, that it doesn't have enough power or weight to stand up against, well, you're endangering me, so you need to go into the room and stay there and not be by us. um, and we saw some of those chickens come home to roost, and it does do service to all of us at Constituting America and for the work you do, because it shows us more accurately the discussions that we need to be having, and where to focus our energy in order to help our culture stay on track with really the principles we believe in from our founding. Thank you so much, Evita. Could talk forever. Kenyon's here. I've lost track of time a little bit, and I know he's got a lot of amazing questions.
Thank you, Jewel. This is Kenyawana speaking now, and thank you, Evita, for being on today. The first question I would like to ask is, how do you think the censorship that we've seen in recent years has shaped the hyper-partisan culture of today?
It's a good question. I love to talk about the government-directed censorship that we've experienced. So specifically during the COVID era, and then also around the time of the 2020 election, we had mass government-directed censorship of anything related to COVID-19, anything related to election integrity, even Twitter posts that were critical of Jill Biden were told by the White House to be censored by Twitter. Of course, this was pre-Elon Musk era. So a really unprecedented way that the federal government was deciding what was permissible speech in the digital public square. And it created this monolith, or not really monolith. It created this echo chamber on all of the platforms. And not just that you weren't able to post certain things, but that certain voices were explicitly removed from the conversation. There have been people that are now back on Twitter that have not been on Twitter for almost a decade. I mean, and people who I might not agree with, but I do believe that they have a right to have their voices heard. And I don't know did I just freeze there? Maybe not. We're good. Okay. So I do think that the government-directed censorship is a huge deal. And even if we have an incoming admin that is saying it's committed to free speech and that it's no longer going to do that, the problem is that the US government has now outsourced its censorship to third parties. So there's different NGOs that receive government funding that do the bidding of the federal government to censor content that the government doesn't like. And it's a huge problem.
Thank you. I think that answers my question, and I do think that government interfering in the media is a big problem. But my next question is, why did the culture of censorship start in the first place? Because we know that the government is doing things and stuff like that, but where did it all start in the first place?
I was actually thinking about this question yesterday as I was preparing for my podcast today. If you think back to the Woodrow Wilson years, the progressive era, I believe he was an academic, and he was a big fan of the experts. He's a big fan of not necessarily representative government governing the people, but so like the congressmen and senators that we elect, or even the president, but very intellectual individuals, people who are, again, experts in their field, dictating what Americans should and shouldn't do. And so that doesn't just apply to Anthony Fauci, who nobody ever elected, deciding all of our health policy, but it also applies to the WEF, the World Economic Forum, the WHO, G20, IMF, all of these globalist organizations who are made up of so-called experts that then want to decide what Americans should and shouldn't be allowed to say and do. And our founding fathers did not intend for that at all. They didn't have this idea that experts should be in charge of the people. The people were supposed to have representative government, where those that we actually decided to govern over us would have power, not people that we never even elected. And I think that this culture of and support of experts over regular people, experts deciding what is and isn't truth, experts deciding what should and shouldn't be permissible, has really deteriorated our First Amendment rights and just the Constitution in general in a very deeply negative way.
100% agreed there. Thank you. And then my last question would be, what can we do to help bring down the culture of partisanship and censorship?
Okay, good question. I'm a little bit of a firebrand individual. So when people like bring it down, I'm like, no, let's keep talking. I love to have fiery debates that don't include death threats and threats to violence. That's the standard. And I think that there is this perception, if you flip to certain news channels, that to bring unity, we have to silence certain voices that are too controversial, that are sowing disunity in the country. And my opinion is the exact opposite. If you don't want people to feel like they're alienated, if you don't want them to lash out, if you don't want them to want to stage a revolution, then you have to let them talk. You have to let them have a voice, and not just let them, exist on a platform, but you also have to let them have authentic reach. There's a lot of shadow banning that happens on Facebook or on X, and it still happens on X even under Elon Musk. And we have to be able to have authentic conversations and to let people really work through ideas instead of silencing them. That, I think, is what's going to create the most normalcy, create the least amount of conflict. Because when you let people's opinions fester, if you make them feel like they're alienated, you're only going to, I think, create more problems in the future.
Agreed there that trying to silence people tends to make them more resentful toward you. Now I could keep asking questions, but I'm going to pass to Kathy for some audience questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kenyon and Jewel and Janine and Evita. I echo what Janine says. We're just so proud of you and amazed at all you've done, and just really admire you for standing up and being a voice for your generation and for free speech on campus. And before I go to the audience questions, I want to give a shout out to some of our students and teachers who are watching today. We have Lizette Flores Grace and Faith Academy has got some students watching. And Dr. Alex Tokarev at Northwest University has 110 business freshmen watching, Dr. Tokarev said. And I think he may even have a little extra credit class assignment for this particular episode. So that's exciting.
Wow.
And we also want to thank our listeners on Las Vegas's KKVV 1060 AM on the radio dial. These Constituting America live Constitutional Chats podcasts air on Monday evenings at 6 p.m. Las Vegas time. So thank you to everyone listening on KKVV. So Evita, we've got some nice comments here. Sharon Tate says, Evita has such poise for a young woman. Was she ever afraid for her safety? She was really able to accomplish so much despite all the obstacles.
So yeah, I would say I was afraid for my safety, but not necessarily because I was afraid of other students. I went to I went to UChicago, which is on the South Side. I had classmates of mine actually die on public transit, friends pistol whipped. So that was not necessarily afraid for my safety when it came to free expression. Although, you always do get really, mean, kind of threatening anonymous DMs that happens. But coming from Wisconsin, a very nice, very safe, small, middle America town, to then going to the south side of Chicago was a big change.
Wow. Lilibeth McKee asks, well, it says, wow, this is awesome. Kudos to you, Evita, for being brave to openly speak about this. I'm all with you. So I thought that was
Awesome. Thank
nice.
you.
Thank you, Lilibeth. And wanted to ask a question here from Sandy Thatcher, who says that experts are the foundation of all scholarly publishing as done by university presses. Do you oppose publishing by university presses? Are you familiar with that, like the
Yeah,
Chicago?
no, certainly not. So there's a balance, and I probably should have made that more clear. There is certainly a role for experts in our society. We need them. We need them in the medical field. We need them in academia. We need them in certain policy spheres. We definitely need experts. My point is that the founding fathers didn't intend for unelected experts to govern the populace. Certainly their opinions matter. We need them, but they are not supposed to be in charge. They are not the end all be all. They need to work in tandem with the people that we actually elected to govern us.
Thank you. And then Julianne Smith asks, in a perfect world, what would you envision a college campus to look like regarding the intent of the founders and the First Amendment?
So I think during the time of the founders, and actually for centuries before the founders, universities were Christian. Universities were rooted in the truth of Christianity. I'm a Catholic. That's just what I believe. And they were really spiritual fulfillment through logos. And today, because they've completely abandoned that, I think we've seen just the destruction of knowledge in our university system, and the way that in the Middle Ages they viewed the university system. It was, music, the sciences, and in addition to philosophy, were all viewed through the prism of faith. That was the root of their studies. That was why they were sitting down and reading and writing and doing what they were doing. And it served them really well for centuries. And I think now suddenly we have this overgrowth of secular universities and even Christian universities that are only really Christian in name only, that have, I think, really failed to live up to the legacy of the institutions of the past. And I think that is because they are irreligious.
Thank you. And Hope Mucklow asks, how did the rest of your time at the University of Chicago go? Did you have more persecution or respect until you graduated? And do you feel like that you've made some inroads both with the University of Chicago and maybe with other universities as well after standing up?
So I became a little bit infamous on campus. Everybody knew who I was, and it mostly was not positive, which is unfortunate. But what I loved about by the end of my time there was through the publication that I had co-founded. I had a community of people who not only were mostly like-minded, but just respected me, and I could have conversations with. And I'll just say, I don't want to be super disparaging of U Chicago, because I actually believe that out of all of the top universities in America, U Chicago is the only one that has attracted, because of its Chicago principles for free speech and because of the Calvin Report, has attracted some really interesting students. That the publication that I was part of and the community that I was able to build would not have been possible at Princeton. It would not have been possible at Harvard or Yale. And so I am a big U Chicago advocate. As somebody who had some really bad experiences there, I still believe that it was a great institution. I don't regret going there at all. And I think it's just because they had those stated principles, even if they weren't that committed to them, attracted so many good students that it was worth it.
Well, thank you, Evita. And this has been a great episode. We're so happy that you were able to join us. We wanted to ask, could we play our video of you when you were our contest winner back when you were 10 years old? I think Jorn has pulled it up.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
So we want to remind our audience, this is Evita when she won our contest back when she was 10 years old or so.
I'm Evita Duffy, and I'm 10 years old. I won Best Artwork. I'm from Wisconsin. Last minute, I decided blue because I think it kind of it blends in it. It just looks better than all the other colors I tried in my drafts. And down here, I read a book about George Washington, and I got the background colors from there. And the suns here are kind of to show to get kind of funny and funky, kind of just something besides the founding fathers, like just a little extra thing I put in there. I like to do that. And basically this is what log rolling looks like: water everywhere, and the logs running really fast. If you can see the lines there, make it to see if it's going really fast. And and then there I'm drawing the background here of this farm. And yeah.
Yay, that was so great. And we usually have music in the background on that video, but I think the Zoom may have blocked the music out, at least on mine. I don't know, but we show it to students all over the United States, elementary school students, and we get so many kids who will come up to us after our school speeches, inspired by you, Evita, with their own drawing to enter our contest. So we are just so happy to have had you on today, and thank you so much for your generous gift of time. And Jewel and Kenyon, any parting words?
Just thank you for what you do, and we'll be following. And you're a great advocate in your accomplishments for Constituting America and for the country.
Thank you so much for having me. I listening to that video was funny. I sound just like my little sisters. I have 8 younger siblings, and so it was a fun little flashback.
You'll have to show them.
Listen, I'm off camera. I'm off camera, but I just want to say, Evita, I'm so impressed with you. Thank you so much. We still treasure you, and we appreciate your time today. And we're going to be following your great stratosphere of success.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm always grateful to Constituting America. You guys are an amazing organization.
Thank you, Evita.
I would like to say thank you, and keep crusading for free speech.
Will do. You too. When you go to college, you keep doing it. Everybody listening, and I think if Constituting America reaches enough people, we're going to see some change for sure.
I think so too. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.